Thank you, John. First of all, thank you for all the effort you have made to bring us together on Zoom. Even though we could not meet together in Oxford, of course, there is nothing that can substitute a meeting in Oxford in person. But but you have done what you could under the circumstances. And thank you very much. And I'm sure that everybody else is also uh, sharing my sentiment of gratitude towards you. Uh, since we are just beginning the conference, I would like to begin by taking a stock of some of the developments that have taken place since we met in the last CRIC conference in at the beginning of October 2019, and how some of these critical developments have had an impact on multilateralism, and where do we go from here? That's my general approach. Now, last September, just before we met at Oxford, the Global Pandemic Monitoring Board issued a report. Now, Global Pandemic Monitoring Board is a joint institution set up by the World Bank and the WHO, and it is chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Prime Minister of Norway. Now, the board issued the first annual report last September, and in that report, it said that a pandemic which is fast moving and which is likely to cause respiratory infection is imminent. This was said publicly in the last September of last year. The report also said that the pandemic would cause up to 50 million deaths and uh, reduce the global GDP by 5%. So, what has happened now, we cannot say we were not forewarned. A month later, in October last year, Bill Gates and a few other people organized what was called Event 201 in New York. And in this event, again, they presented a scenario of a fast moving pandemic, which would be of the type of SARS. And again, we had another warning. Finally, on 30th of January this year, the WHO formally announced global health emergency. And this time, it didn't talk about a pandemic like SARS or a pandemic like COVID, but it officially announced the arrival of COVID. Now, if the WHO is announcing a global health emergency on 30th of January, you would expect the governments of the world to get together on a video or whatever means that they can find on the 31st of January or the 1st of February and try to find solutions to this imminent global problem. Nothing of that sort happened. On the other hand, from 14th to 16th of February this year, the foreign ministers and defense ministers of major countries, including the United States and China, met in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. They did not discuss COVID-19, neither was it on the official agenda of the conference, nor is there any report of any informal discussions. So we have been forewarned about COVID-19 or a pandemic similar to it consistently almost every month since last September. And finally officially announced this January. And the world's major powers took no steps when they could take any steps to have multilateral cooperation to try to stop this pandemic from or stop this virus from spreading far and wide. Because if they had decided on the 31st of January to stop this virus, they could have taken a number of steps at that time. But none of that happened. They didn't even look at this as a problem. So this is what happened with the pandemic about 12 to 8 months ago. While this was happening, there's another set of developments that took place a few months ago. In March, the United States tested hypersonic missile on 21st of March in Hawaii Island. So while the world was going in the lockdown over pandemic, US was launching hypersonic missile. Now, hypersonic missile, for those who are here who know, and maybe some who don't know, takes the nuclear weapons competition to an extremely high level, because hypersonic missile cannot be detected by a radar. And so basically, and it carries a nuclear payload. So basically, if you start using hypersonic missiles, you have a nuclear war, which there is no way to stop it at all at any stage. And so basically, you are looking at the threat of human extinction, or at least a large part of humanity being extinct once the hypersonic missiles are in use. Now, the United States tested this missile in March because the Russia had already inducted this missile, which travels at 27 times the speed of sound in the Russian defense forces at the beginning of January. And the Chinese have been having this for the last 2 years. So over pandemic, we could not cooperate. Over the issues related to most lethal harms, the big powers are engaged in competition, and they increase that competition at the beginning of or in the first quarter of 2020, when the rest of the world is trying to face the pandemic. And in a different area, the third development that I want to bring to your attention since our last meeting is that a lot of forest fires have taken place. They have taken place in United States, they have happened in India, in northern India, they have happened in Australia, they have taken place in Siberia, they have taken place in Amazon, though Amazon forest fires are of different kind than the rest of the forest fires I mentioned. So in brief, if you look at the health situation, if you look at arms race, and if you look at environment, our multilateral framework doesn't seem to be existing at all. I'm not even talking about a weak multilateral framework. I'm not even talking about an inefficient framework. What we are seeing by evidence is almost the absence of multilateral framework for dialogue and for exploring cooperation. Now, when I talk about the weakening or disappearance or erosion of the multilateral framework, there are different levels and layers that we must keep in mind. The top of the hierarchy is, of course, the UN Security Council. As Lord Alderdice said in the introductory remarks, the heads of states of the three major powers are involved in a huge national and personal conflict, and the UN Security Council is completely paralyzed. This is not my opinion. This has been the opinion of the chairman of the Security Council for every successive month in the last 3 months. So the Security Council is paralyzed. But it's not just the Security Council. You also have regional institutions, multilateral institutions, which are being paralyzed and which are being eroded. Some of you might remember that we were privileged to have a visit by Ambassador Thomas Greminger a couple of years ago at the Creek to give a talk. Now, Ambassador Greminger is the Secretary General of OSCE. He stepped down in July of 2020, and they haven't been able to find either a replacement or renewal of not only the Secretary General, but of the entire top leadership of the OSCE. So here you have OSCE, a 60-member second largest security organization in the world, without a leadership at all for since June or since July. You also have a situation in the Islamic world where the Gulf Cooperation Council is split. You have the Arab League is split, and you have the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Conference, is split. Then you look at the regional economic organizations. We are right now going through a process where Britain is exiting from EU, and that process will be complete by the end of the year. So EU has officially been split. SAARC, where I come from, the South Asian Regional Cooperation, has become stagnant for the last 2 years. It's just not functioning anymore. So from EU to Gulf Cooperation Council, from Arab League to SAARC, regional organizations are also on a standstill or being eroded or being split. ASEAN seems to be the only one surviving, and whether it actually does or not, Kumar might enlighten us better. So this is the situation with political multilateralism. Then what is happening with economic multilateralism? Economic multilateralism is also under a lot of pressure at the institutional level and at the market level, which is very important when it comes to economic multilateralism. At the institutional level, we have two regions where there is a split taking place. We have EU, where the British economy is separating from the European economy, and we do not even know what kind of separation it will be on the 31st of December this year, and what will be the economic consequences of that. You have Gulf economy already split. In the case of EU, it's Britain which has desired to separate from EU. In the case of Gulf, it's Qatar which has been forced by the other member states to effectively separate from the Gulf Cooperation Council. And so even though formally there is a Gulf Cooperation Council and formally all of them are members, you have the Qatari economy facing sanctions, taking blockades, and being split. Then you have the China-US trade war. And so the WTO rules of the game are being eroded in this China-US trade war for last 7-8 months, and particularly, but this is something that has gone on for last 2 years. So the institutional economic multilateralism weakening, but much worse, as a direct result of COVID, we will also see the multilateralism, economic and commercial multilateralism weakening at the market level. Supply chains will be different in future. Many companies, multinational organizations are already thinking of reorganizing their supply chains and to have regional supply chains or national supply chains rather than global supply chains. And so global economy is going to be affected by this. So this is the broad picture of how multilateralism has suffered just in the last 12 months since our last meeting of CRIC in Oxford. And the results of that we have seen, and I mentioned them right in the beginning, is a pandemic that we cannot manage, is a forest fires that are spreading, and an arms race that's going out of control. So when we look at this weakening multilateralism, what are we doing? There is at the formal level a standard response, and the standard response is focused mostly on the UN Security Council or on the UN in general. And the standard response has three strands. One is reform of the UN Security Council. The second is administrative reforms. And the third is just a call for better coordination between member countries. But none of these are going to work because of a very fundamental problem. And that's what I will now address as the last part of my presentation. The fundamental problem with today's multilateral system is that it is a multilateral system, which means it is a system made of nation states. But the problems don't necessarily recognize nation states. Virus can travel and cross the border. Trade flows and technologies travel, they cross the borders. You have pollution which crosses the borders. So our multilateral system is made of nation states, but the problems that face humanity, they don't recognize nation states. So a system of nation states is trying to respond to a problem, a set of problems which don't recognize the very existence of nation states. The second issue is that multilateralism by definition is, or by not by definition, but by character and by its nature, is opposed to nationalism. So there are two ways. You can look at multilateralism as a summation of nationalism. So if you look at the UN, it's multilateral body of 193 national aspirations. Or you can look at multilateralism in a totally different way. Now, if you look at it as a summation of the interest of nation states or aspirations of nation states, then you are dealing with the problem of nationalism, and that is moving in major countries from nationalism to hyper-nationalism. And this hyper-nationalism is happening to a large extent because of a phenomenon that has been often discussed in Creek conferences. And I haven't seen it in many other places. And that is really the dissolution of complexity in our political sphere. We have discussed it mostly in the context of the behavior of militants and terrorists and what you might call the extremists, the religious extremists. But this is also the problem with the mindset of nationalists and people who support nationalism. Terrorist is something that we can abhor easily because they take up violence. But the nationalists gain control legitimately over the instruments of violence. And we are seeing that they also intend to use violence in a different way, in a very legitimate way. Now, you can't solve the problem of multilateralism if it is being opposed by nationalism, which is a result of collapse of complexity in many countries. So just by trying to stitch together multilateralism in like a fabric in an artificial way is not going to solve the problem unless you look at the fundamentals of what is happening in the country. Unfortunately, what is happening is that those who are trying to look for solutions to the problems of multilateral think of whether there should be 15 members of Security Council or 25 members of Security Council, and whether there should be more transparency in the UN administration or less transparency, and how it should be financed, and things like that, which are very bureaucratic and diplomatic and very artificial or very technical. But really, if we want to solve the problem of multilateralism, weakening multilateralism in the long run, then we have to deal with the growth of hyper-nationalism. And that has to deal with the very growing sense of insecurity and collapse of dissolution of complexity in many societies around the world. And it's more pronounced in the countries which are powerful, which are big, but it's there in many parts of the world. So therefore, I would now come to my conclusion that on one side, we have to look at multilateralism with a very deep understanding of what's happening in the forces that oppose multilateralism, the nationalism, hyper-nationalism, and why nationalism. And second, on the second side, we have to keep in mind that the multilateral institutions are really the bargaining places or marketplaces for conflicting interests of states. At the end of the day, UNO is not UNO, it is UGO. It is United Governments Organization. It is not United Nations Organization. And this is a place where governments meet, they interact, they bargain, and they try to they negotiate their interests, and they often find common interests. But this is very much from a governmental point of view, from nation state point of view. If we really want to have a healthy and sustainable global society in the long run, which is totally would be like a dream in today's situation. And if you want to have a capacity to deal with civilizational problems like pandemics, like arms race, like climate change, then we need an approach which aims to create an institutional framework which is not a bargaining place for nation states, but which is supranational and which represents a humanity, not represent individual nation states. So which takes into account only the interest of humanity at large and not of the regions and not of the nations. Now, this is a dream which has been articulated by a number of people from Kant to Mahatma Gandhi, and it has not been realized in all these centuries and decades. And of course, it would be very naive and utopian to believe that it will be realized in the future. But that is what our long-term aim should be, and that is where we should contribute at least some of our intellectual endeavor and intellectual capacity. So what we can do is, in future, we can look at multilateralism at two levels. One is multilateralism as a mechanism of negotiations between states, which is what is existing now and how it can be reformed and made more efficient for management of day-to-day issues. And then you need a humanity approach or a civilizational approach to address problems of civilization, issues that threaten the existence of civilization. So we need to give up our simplistic approach towards multilateralism, which is only summation of national interests, to a more nuanced approach where we distinguish between national interests and humanities interests. Now, this is a big challenge. And if you ask me how to do that, I would say let's discuss that in another seminar. Thank you, John. I think I have been able to manage it well within time, so we have some time for a little discussion.